Good afternoon, those of you watching on Zoom. We're just going to give it a few more seconds for everyone to load into the system. We had over 300 registrations for today's event, so it just takes a little while for everybody to load in. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ken Levinson. I'm the Executive Director of WITA. We hope you are well and staying safe wherever you are. We're so glad you could join us this afternoon, and welcome back. If you're with us for our webinar this morning with Jesus Seade, the Mexican candidate to be Director General of the WTO. This is actually our 20th webinar since March, and we're pleased to be a virtual meeting place for the trade community at a time when we cannot meet in person. One of our favorite new traditions is to highlight some of the people you're here with in the audience, even if you can't see their faces. So welcome today to Roger Murray with Aiken Gump, Jennifer Prescott, the former Assistant USTR for Environment and Natural Resources, now with Amazon Web Services, Eric Beal with the Fair Labor Association, and Deborah Wagner from Corning. Welcome to them and to all of you. Coming up on Thursday, we have a very timely event looking at proposals for digital services taxes and the trade policy response by the US government. We'll be joined then by Grant Aldonis, the former Undersecretary of Commerce, Pam Olson, the former Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Tax Policy, and Meredith Broadbent, who is the chair of the International Trade Commission. We hope you'll join us. That's at 11 a.m. on Thursday. If you're watching this on Zoom after discussion between Orit and Congressman Larsen, you'll have the ability to ask questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. With over 200 people on this webinar, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. You should have received an email from us earlier this afternoon with biographies for our speakers, so I'll skip lengthy introductions, but would like to say a special welcome to our guests, Orit Frankel of the American Leadership Initiative and Congressman Rick Larsen. We're delighted to welcome a congressman back to WITA. He's a recipient of our Congressional Leadership Award in 2017, and we've had the pleasure of hosting him several times over the years at live events in Washington. Congressman, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you and your family are safe and well. With that, thank you, and Orit, it's on to you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Diego, and WITA for your partnership in this event with the American Leadership Initiative to discuss US-China relations. The American Leadership Initiative, or ALI, is creating a new vision and policy agenda for restoring American global leadership, working with elected officials and their staff and a diverse group of thought leaders. If you want to learn more about us and get involved, please go to our website at american-leadership.org. Thank you, Congressman Larsen, for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule to talk with us today. You've been a friend of ALI, which we really appreciate. This is our ALI's 4th congressional webinar, and these interviews have been a really useful way to connect with members, you know, at a time when unfortunately we can't meet in person.
Yeah.
Congressman Larsen has represented Washington State for almost 20 years. And in 2005, he founded the US-China Working Group, which is a bipartisan group, which he co-chairs still today. He's traveled to China numerous times over the years and has really distinguished himself as a thought leader, a leading thought leader on US-China relations in Congress. So we know that our trade relations with China have really deteriorated over the past few years with, you know, the US has imposed tariffs, China has retaliated. The relationship really continued downward with the onset of the pandemic, with China's lack of transparency, the US blaming them. And then, you know, the tensions have continued to rise as China has continued to sort of assert its leadership and try to fill in the vacuum left by the US. So navigating the relationship has just been increasingly complex. So we're glad to have the opportunity to talk to you today. So let's start with trade. Average US tariffs from China on products from China are now 20%, which is about 6 times what they were before the trade war. And US imports from China have actually fallen about 16% at this point. So layering on the tariff issue, we have you know, the national security restraints around trade in medical products. We have increasing restrictions on technology trade. The Commerce Department just a few weeks ago added 33 more Chinese entities to their blacklist for their involvement with the military and human rights violations in Xinjiang. So altogether, we're really seeing kind of an increasing decoupling in a way. So do you think this will continue? What can we really expect from U.S.-China trade over the next few years?
First off, if I just quickly say thanks to ALI and to WITA for inviting me on the call. And I understand there's some good folks also from Washington State on the call as well. I'm here in Everett, Washington, and it's good to be home and meeting with my constituents as best as I can. But it's also great to be with you all today. I would note that, or you said it, that I'm taking time out of my busy schedule. I do have a busy schedule, and you are on my schedule, so you're not taking time out of my schedule at all. But I would note, and I think for everybody here, you probably do understand that in the pandemic era, it's hard not to miss a meeting, and it's hard for your staff not to schedule your time, because what were you doing otherwise except sitting on your couch 10 feet away from your dining room table where the meeting took place on your computer? So it's hard to miss a meeting at all in the pandemic era. But that being said, on your question with regards to the future trade, I'm not quite sure. You know, we started the U.S.-China Working Group in 2005, so it's been 15 years this year, 15 years last month, in fact. And the idea was to create a space in the U.S. House of Representatives where members of Congress, the House, could meet, discuss, talk, and that still sometimes does happen. But over the last couple of years, the nature of the center of gravity in Congress has changed quite a bit, and I think it's because these three wings of the China hawks, the national security hawks, the economic hawks, and the human rights hawks, all found each other and now are flying together as opposed to separately. And that has fundamentally changed the center of gravity in the House of Representatives vis-a-vis the U.S. relationship with China on any number of issues. In fact, I've changed my analysis of how to group members of Congress, and it's I don't say this in any joking way, but there are the punishers, the folks who seek to punish China for any number of things and only take that approach. There are the decouplers who are trying to sever that, mainly that trade relationship. And then the third group, which I put myself in, is the salvagers, recognizing that there are true areas of competition and true areas of concern between the US and China in these relationships, but also that there is still room for cooperation on key issues. And I think that's where folks sit. So where does this go in terms of trade? I think that the discussion around the phase one trade deal is important only because I don't think China will meet its obligations strictly because of the pandemic and COVID-19 and the impact on the economy. But I don't think that's necessarily an excuse to get rid of the phase one trade deal. I don't think the phase one trade deal was basically trying to get us back to zero as opposed to move us forward. It's moving us forward from after we went backwards, but not into plus territory. But I think moving backwards from the phase one trade deal would be a bad thing anyway right now. And we at least ought to maintain that so that we have some sort of established relationship on trade to continue trying to move forward, to find out what that next balancing act is, not a new balancing act, what the next one is. So that's how I think about it. There's a lot of details around that, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
Okay, and I know that, at ALI, one thing we've really focused on a lot, is the need to really work with our allies. I know you agree with that, work with our allies rather than, imposing tariffs on them. Do you think that, there's room for that approach, and how is that going to change our trade trajectory?
Yeah, I still think that there is. We've done a lot to, I think, harm our relationship with our natural trade partners and natural allies. And allies is a term of art sometimes. I just finished last week a long armed services markup, so allies is a very different meaning in my head right now. But our natural trade partners, working with them, the EU, the Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, Singapore, I don't want to forget everybody, but working with our natural trade partners and friends and allies from an agreed upon set of rules about how we want to trade and working together in order to influence change in the Chinese government's trade policy is still, in my view, the best route to go. Although we do have bilateral trade relationships with China, they don't operate bilaterally out in the world. There is a place for China to go if we stop exporting soybeans. You mentioned the tariff number down on average being down 20% from, I think it was as high as 26 or 27%, but it was as low as 8.5%. And when it was average 8.5%, so was the average tariff from EU products into China. That number has actually dropped below 8.5%, as far as I can remember, while ours increased. So, I mean, the bilateral relationship really doesn't, it does not live in a vacuum. It lives among other trading relationships. So I think it's best that we do form these broader relationships to try to influence what the rules of trade are and encourage, and if that doesn't work, then use the sticks that occur to try to influence trade policy that's coming out of China.
Thank you. So, I think, people have been feeling that the WTO really isn't able to control a lot of China's practices, particularly the forced labor and industrial subsidies. And I think that's led many to just question the usefulness of the WTO. I think it's partly why the administration went outside the WTO to address its relationship with China. So I know that we believe strongly in the need to, reform and strengthen the WTO. Do you think the WTO, that there's a will to do that, and really, is it possible to get it to a place where it can address what's going on with China?
Well, I know if the U.S. doesn't lead and try, there's a 0% chance. And I know if the U.S. leads and does try, there's a chance somewhere between 0 and 100% to be successful. So I'd put my odds on, I would bet on the latter approach as opposed to the former approach, because as frustrating of a tool as WTO is, and there are many legitimate criticisms of the WTO, it is yet an important tool to influence trade policy. And the U.S. The U.S. still can lead in the world, and it can lead together with good friends too. But it needs to lead within the WTO as well. And we can't lead from within the WTO from the outside. And I would argue that trying to do too much outside of the WTO hasn't been necessarily successful for either U.S. trade policy or the U.S. economy generally as well. So Ron Kind and I and others have I think it's HR 746, the bipartisan resolution, both expressing support for the WTO, but also expressing the need for reforms in the WTO. And the New Dem Trade Task Force, of which I'm a co-chair as well, we've looked at this for the New Dems, and the New Dems are four square behind 746 and behind reforming the WTO as well. But I don't think that going it your own way in today's global economy ignores both the realities of the global economy, and it ignores the opportunities to create new realities in the global economy. But that's the approach this administration has taken. I don't support it. I'm not presuming the politics of anyone who's listening in today, But my politics have been really clear, and the approaches I've been taking and communicating on trade have been really clear as well. And I think that we're better off together than we are going off alone.
Well, I know at ALI, we really support that notion of sort of building and strengthening the institutions and really getting America back in a position where it can lead. So I appreciate your thoughts. So moving to technology for a moment, there's been a lot of increasing concern about Huawei, ZTE, and other, Chinese technology companies, and the administration has imposed a lot of restrictions over the past few years. In May, there were further restrictions barring Huawei from purchasing U.S. equipment and software. And I think in your interesting, in your hawk, the three kinds of hawks, I assume all of them, and maybe even you as the salvager, would agree that we need a lot of these restrictions, that there really is a significant national security issue. So I guess I'm wondering, is it possible, on the other hand, we clearly need to collaborate with China in this sector. They have a lot of advances that we need to partner on. We use a lot of their inputs, et cetera. How can we really collaborate while really protecting our technology and our national security?
Yeah, it's a very small needle to thread. Is the symbolic or metaphorical answer. The more complex answer is naturally more complex. I think, though, that when you look at the decoupling argument, decoupling is actually more of a technology approach. Because I would say, Boeing is not decoupling from China. Boeing's going to sell to China. Boeing is going to build things, parts in China. Heavy manufacturers, as other heavy manufacturers, are not decoupling from China. They're going to build in China for China. I think, look at agriculture. Part of the phase one deal was soybeans, American soybeans to China. It wasn't American soybeans somewhere else. But if you look at technology, the technology sector, that's really where the decoupling argument is, where there's a lot more discussion taking place on it. And so, yes, problems with Huawei and ZTE, serious problems, serious national security problems, very real problems, important approaches that this administration has taken and will likely be continued in to some extent, if not fully, or maybe differently in a subsequent administration. But there are areas that we're playing a lot of defense and not going on offense on technology. And a lot of this is laid out in a white paper that I did over the last year and a half or so, and we can distribute that around. It's a fascinating read. It's not all that fascinating, but it does outline a lot of things, a lot of approaches we can take about going on offense. One of those areas is we need to be more active as a U.S. policy in the standard setting bodies around the world when it comes to technology. And we've been a little bit more absent than not. The House Armed Services bill last week, for some reason, includes a provision that includes encourages the U.S. to be much more active in technology standard setting bodies that exist. It includes language that I authored with Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin, on 5G planning for the Defense Department. But we had to work with the Energy and Commerce Committee and Mike Doyle and Bob Latta, Democrat and Republican, to get the Energy and Commerce 5G bill included in the defense bill, so that we can address 5G standards from a collective, really, truly whole of government approach here in the United States. So my point is, just saying no to Huawei or no to ZTE or no to other Chinese technology companies isn't enough if we're not doing trying to do our own thing and develop alternatives, working with, again, natural trading partners, natural allies, natural friends, in developing alternatives and technology as well as then again participating in technology standard setting bodies. There are things that we need to do more of and do them better in terms of going on offense and technology. If the decouplers want to claim a success. But I also think that because of the manufacturing of components and parts, that I don't know that a true decoupling could ever take place, because these products are built from parts that are built not all over the world, but certainly from more than one country. And so a true decoupling probably can't take place, but we can do a lot better on the security side and a lot better on the standard setting side.
Thank you. So just continuing, I think, one area that I focused on, at ALI quite a bit is China's spreading of its technology globally. Yeah. And, selling particularly in Africa and other developing countries. And, when they sell their equipment, unfortunately, they also sell their standards, whether it's censorship, monitoring, and all these kinds of threats to democracy, frankly. Mm-hmm. And I think, one thing that I hear from a lot of companies is how difficult it is for the US to compete because, they just seem to have limitless funding. So we've sort of advanced the notion of a digital Marshall Plan. The US needs to put together a fund that would help finance these US sales, that would allow countries to get US equipment and with them, hopefully US standards of more openness, transparency, et cetera. Given that, how do we go about trying to get funding for US exports in the tech sector?
Certainly priorities are set by administrations, and then priorities are set by the House and by the Senate as well. And so the question is how to get funding for that partnership that would be necessary, because the United States government, we're not going to compete on a dollar for dollar basis on what China is doing, and nor should we. It's usually bad economics to do what China is doing in terms of how they're financing. And I think that having a higher reliance in the private sector also means that we have a higher threshold of risk and the opportunity for innovation as well. So we need to be careful about copying that which we do not like. So that'd be the first thing. The second point I'd make is that, it's facetiously I say it's only money, but it is only money. It's only how we establish budgets to reflect the priorities that are important to the United States. And we can argue, debate. We can debate about what priorities this particular administration has to do something like a full-scale digital Marshall Plan. Probably a good one for this fall as opposed to today. But I do think that ideas like the digital Marshall Plan and other ideas merit a lot of discussion if, in fact, we want to open doors for U.S. companies and the workers that work at U.S. companies in the United States. Absolutely. Who can be part of the proliferation of technology that reflects our own values. Because let's be clear. Well, let us be clear. Let me be clear. Chinese-based technology does reflect the values of the Chinese Communist Party. Censorship, invasiveness, no privacy, and the use for social control. That is what is being built into the algorithms which drive the technology used in China and the technology that's being used that the Chinese government, as a matter of policy, is seeking to export. So we shouldn't question whether or not values get baked into these things. So now we got to, and how they do it. So we need to find ways of how we bake in openness, transparency, as well as bake in our broader values about open markets, transparency in trade, transparency in contracts, and so on, into our option. I wouldn't call it an alternative. I'd call it the option we provide. But I don't want to be seen as the alternative to China. I'd rather see it the other way around.
Absolutely.
Where we lead.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I see we have some questions coming from the audience. So, we've seen, sadly, a pretty dramatic escalation in China's human rights violations with the internment camps and forced labor in Xinjiang, and now, the incredible crackdown in Hong Kong. And Congress passed last week legislation, imposing sanctions on Chinese officials that are implementing Beijing's national security law, and banks and companies that are also doing business with those that are Chinese entities that are facilitating the crackdown. I wanted to ask, number one, how come, should we be doing more? And secondly, I think, should we be trying to engage our allies to join us in these kind of sanctioning measures?
I think sanctions work when they're done in consort with others. I think history shows that. I think that I will say this with regard to Congress, the collective will of the House of Representatives anyway, is that we aren't going to wait. I think it is. I'm entirely on board with what the House of Representatives is doing with regards to Xinjiang and Hong Kong. We need to speak loudly and clearly about what we think is right, what we think is reflective of U.S. values when it comes to democracy and openness and human rights, and take our lumps for it. When the Chinese will insult us, the Chinese government will insult us back and point out our faults, and at least we recognize our faults and we embrace them and try to fix them. China does not do that, and I also, considering in Hong Kong last March, a year ago March, so what's that, 15 months now, we met with new leaders in Hong Kong, new leaders of democracy, and old, experienced leaders of democracy in Hong Kong as well, and had a round table. I say we had 6 members of Congress. So we met with 4 democracy leaders. And I'm not sure we could pull that off again under the national security law. And so I'm glad we did it. But I think we ought to continue to try to do those kinds of meetings when if as members of Congress, we go back to Hong Kong. And there's some question in my mind about whether it's, what the timing would be and whether it'd be the right thing to go back to Hong Kong. I'd want to talk to human rights leaders. I want to talk to US-based businesses there, friends there as well. I'd want to talk to them about what they think our approach ought to be now that we've passed this law. Don't want to be seen as encouraging mainland China policy in Hong Kong. But I always say too, that and the flip side of that is, sorry, I'm commiserating a little bit too much for people here, but the flip side of that is the value of the US-China Working Group has been that we get to be in the room and communicate directly to Chinese leaders what US values are, and make those points clearly and loudly directly to their face, as opposed to never being in the room and sort of screaming from outside the room, which I think is a much less effective approach to communicating what US ideals are.
Agreed. All right, last question. So, I think we've all seen Biden's ad, that mentions kind of the failed trade war with China. And I think, he seems to be signaling that he's going to take a different approach should he become president. If you were advising him, and maybe you are actually advising him, what would you suggest him to do if he were elected in November?
First off, let me say that as a Washington state person, I don't think I've seen that ad, but I know I'm talking to a bunch of Washingtonians who probably have seen the ad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to avoid political ads as much as possible, so until I have to. But I think that if I were to advise the Biden team, and if they were to ask, I would. My thoughts wouldn't reflect anything much different than what Vice President Biden published in Foreign Affairs magazine a few months back in their approach. I think that they will be tough on China. I think the Clinton administration was going to be tougher than the Obama administration. I think that's definitely where it was headed with regards to U.S.-China policy. But I do think that I would advise the Biden folks that at least in my trips around the region in Asia and even in Europe, there is a desire for U.S. leadership. There's a desire for U.S. engagement with our traditional friends that would put us in good stead with them, that they would come along, lead and maybe co-lead, however they want to put it, an effort to based on rules of how we trade, that they would come along and work with the U.S. to place pressure on the Chinese government and its policies on economics and on trade and a variety of other things as well. So I would encourage them to, it's almost like you're asking me, would you encourage the Biden administration to do what they're probably going to do anyway? Yes. The short answer is yes. Lead, put America first, but not America only. Work with our allies and friends to buttress the international institutions that we'll need to be successful in a trade relationship with China. Invest in our domestic capacity in a new workforce development system that prepares the next generation workforce for an increasingly globalized economy. Prepare the U.S. infrastructure, making sure that we are investing in especially these days, in an infrastructure investment-based recovery that puts people to work in good paying jobs, building and maintaining the physical infrastructure of the United States. Make sure we're expanding rural broadband access in the United States so that the digital divide and the opportunity that closes and the opportunity that opens up when we close the digital divide reaches as many people as possible. Take care and frankly, take care of as aggressively as you do that, aggressively address the social injustices in the United States and show the rest of the world that we recognize there is still systemic racism in the US, there's still racial injustice in the United States, and the next administration is going to put as much energy into that as it is into the global relationships that we need to repair. Because we're not done repairing the United States. We're not a perfect union. We're always and will always be a more perfect union with work to do. That's what the framers designed it to be, and that's what we will be.
Thank you. That was so well said. Ken, perfect timing.
Thank you. Thanks. And
I know there are a lot of questions.
I'm hesitant to pivot away from conversation about some of the pressing domestic issues that we have here in the United States, but I do want to bring it, if I may, back to the China conversation and the economic development question. We have several questions that have come in. We're not going to have that much time, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm going to try to combine two of them. First off, Congressman, has to do with the Trump administration. It's clear that their trade policy has been centered on reshoring supply chains, bringing them back, what they think is bringing them back to the United States. It's had some implications for COVID-19 as well, with critical supplies and the supply chains for those. Do you see an effort that would continue in the Biden, if there's a Biden administration, or even if the Trump administration were to continue, that brings back some of those supply chains home, and maybe help, as a way of helping American workers by reshoring, which is certainly the agenda that the administration has been pursuing.
Well, thanks. I think that this may be where I differ with some of the folks on the call. I'm with you on trade. I'm also maybe not with you on what our tax code does to encourage offshoring and doesn't do anything to encourage reshoring. In fact, I don't think we're seeing a lot of reshoring. I think we're seeing, if to the extent decoupling is taking place, it is factories and operations leaving China and going next door to Vietnam or somewhere else, not coming to the United States. I just read, and this is one anecdote and one headline, but one of the Japanese automakers said just recently, we're not going to move jobs in the United States because of the USMCA. We're going to increase what we're paying Mexican workers and keep the jobs there and the factories there. So that's not really the plan for this administration. And so I don't think that they have necessarily been all that successful in their approach to reshore. I think as much concern as we should have about offshoring jobs, creating jobs in the United States is even better. Not moving jobs from somewhere else, which I'd like to see happen, but there's ways to do that. But creating jobs in the United States is even better. And there's things that we can do and invest in here to make that happen and have a positive trade relationship with any number of regions and any number of countries. So
let me pivot from that to a question that hits home a little bit. And I'm not factually, I'm reading the question, but talk about Boeing.
It's my home, not your home.
Yeah, well, it's Boeing and Embraer, I guess, that we're talking about. Some kind of a partnership or merger. I'm not exactly sure, but apparently that's not proceeding.
Right.
And the Chinese might be stepping in. Are we doing enough to support American industries like Boeing that are some of our leading exporters? And can we be doing more to, I think you answered that a little bit, but in this specific case, is this something we need to be worried about?
Yeah. Again, I'll repeat what you said. I haven't really read that. I've heard more about China speculating that China would step in with Embraer, but I don't know that I don't know Embraer had a real great experience, or Boeing, frankly, had a really great experience. And there's a lot of messy legal stuff that I don't want to get into.
Okay, that's fair.
About Embraer and Boeing. But in terms of the broader manufacturing and export support, look, we have tools in the United States that we're not using fully. The Export-Import Bank, the new agency, I forget the name.
The DFC, the
Development Finance Corporation. Yeah, that we've created through the Build Act. USAID, again, looking at how we develop workers to be prepared in this country. There are a lot of things that we can do to support manufacturing and support exports that they're just tools that we have that are sitting on the workbench that we're not picking up at the right time or for the right reasons. And I think that we need to do that first. There's a lot of basics. I think this administration, we might have a 60-game baseball season, so you Washington Nationals fans can go, and I can watch my Seattle Mariners go 20-40 this year. But I think this administration is always swinging for the fence when, if you hit 4 singles or even 3 singles, you still get a run in. And I think the patience of doing small things, but doing them constantly, doing them a lot, is a better longer term approach to developing the kind of foundational export economy and manufacturing economy where we'll be more successful in the long run. I don't think this administration has ever had the patience for that.
So I want to pivot off the baseball metaphor, which, by the way, well done in stacking your baseball metaphors and not shifting to moving the goalpost, for example.
Exactly.
But I don't know how you would characterize the phase one deal in a context of baseball, single, double, whatever. But I think we can safely assume or say that they didn't really address some of the structural issues in China in that deal, dealing with China on subsidies and state-owned enterprises, on some of the deeper intellectual property and forced technology transfer issues. I think they touched a little bit. Do you see, and there's no prospect, honestly, that we're going to see a phase two before the end of this year. Not realistic. So do you think these Section 301 tariffs are just a permanent way of life? And is there a way to address those issues that we didn't get to in phase one, and move away from this tariff war?
If the Trump administration's view is that what we were doing before wasn't working, I think I can make a reasonable case that the way the Trump administration is approaching it, it also isn't working to change the structural problems that we recognize and most trading countries recognize that China has. I think I want to lift up Bob Lighthizer and his team on USMCA. They did a great job, but I'm also critical of their approach on China because they did this phase one deal, or trying now to get these purchasing levels, trying to hit these purchasing levels, but it hasn't done anything to address the structural issues. And I think Lighthizer, during his testimony a few weeks back, sort of lamented that. But this is the whole idea behind this. Is the premise of going to a tariff war with China, was to get changes in the structural problems that we have with China's trade policy. And that didn't work. And yet they call the phase one deal a success, because really phase two was about getting the structural changes. Now I think they're moving the goalposts to go to football. So I think that the next administration, and I think it'll be a Biden administration, needs to reset where we are. They need to reset how we're going to approach this. I think we go back to our allies and our natural trading partners, and we go full on as a world global trading community with heft, and make it clear what we want the rules to be. And it's going to take patience. It's going to take some humility. It's going to take some negotiation, none of which I thought that this particular president has in order to do that. But that is what it will take, because what we're doing now is not working.
So we're running out of time, and I want to be mindful of I know how busy you are, but we appreciate you putting us on your calendar. And I'm going to throw you a softball now. But it seems like it's a good.
MLS starts soon. You can try a soccer now.
My daughter is a high school goalie, and hoping that she'll have a chance to play this fall, which we still don't know yet. But the softball goes back to American leadership. And Reed, I hope you don't mind if I ask this one, but the U.S.-China relationship doesn't just have bilateral implications. It has global implications. China is asserting itself in various ways all across the globe. The U.S. is as well, in a very different way in this administration, perhaps, than in others. But how are we supposed to lead going forward? You've answered this in some ways about working with allies, but I just want to hear, maybe as a closing thought, in the context of the U.S.-China relationship, how the U.S. can be a global leader and help frame both the trade and economic, foreign policy, human rights, all the different things that we have on the plate with China that gets wrapped up into this trade war, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah, well, I'm not a punisher. I'm not a full decoupler. I think on medical supply chains, and there's a few, and then of course on some in technology, there's good policy reasons to separate some from the Chinese supply chain. I'm a salvager, but being a salvager, sort of requires me to be thinking about, okay, well, what are you salvaging? and then once it's salvaged, where do you go? And I think that the U.S. the current U.S. policies that we do recognize that the U.S. and China will be the two largest economies for the longest time, and that neither of us are going away. But we see that as current U.S. policy sees that as only a negative. And I won't try to characterize how China sees that, but only a negative. This is a zero-sum competition from today until sometime long in the future. It may be if we make it that way, but my point of view is that worry about China, but worry about ourselves more. Establish what we want to do. Establish how we want to see the world. Establish how we want to grow economically as a country, and don't apologize for that. But frankly, the way I see it, we shouldn't have to, because we're going to be doing it with as many friends and partners as possible. And I think I'll be thankful for that. I hope our friends and partners will be thankful for that. But I certainly would be thankful for that. And so it's seen as less of a zero-sum game. And if there are places of cooperation, and there are, with China, then we need to have, in that regard, a realpolitik view of that. Recognize that there is a value to that cooperation, that the U.S. gains from that cooperation, because it might have to do with North Korea. It might have to do with a vaccine for coronavirus, for all we know. It might have to do with climate change. It might have to do with any number of things that can't be done alone. Can't be done by ourselves, and it can be done more successfully the more people are in the tent on those issues. And it might be an issue by issue basis. So maybe not getting to your full question, but in the end, I haven't changed my view that we don't have one relationship with China. The U.S. has many relationships with China, and a lot of them are not going well right now. Some of them are neutral, a few of them are neutral, very few of them are going well. But it's not one relationship. And we need to be more nuanced and more particular with, I think, from a policy perspective, with China. And if we do that, then I think the United States will be better off. If China benefits too, then they do. But I'm more concerned about the U.S. benefiting right now. And right now, I don't see a lot of benefit of what the actions, the collective of the actions we're taking.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. Every time I get a chance to interact with you and speak with you, it validates our decision to give you that Congressional Leadership Award at WITA back in 2017. We're very grateful to you for your leadership. Orit, thank you very much for helping bring this Congressman Larsen to WITA to present this event. We're very grateful to both of you. Thanks to everybody who watched. We hope to see you on Thursday for our discussion of digital services taxes, which I know for several of Congressman's constituent companies in Washington State is a big deal.
And the people who work there.
And
Yes.
let me rephrase it. And
Thank
the people
you,
that work
Congressman
there.
Larsen.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Be healthy.
Appreciate it.
Wear a mask. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ken.